It never was architecture. I've battled with the profession and my place in it the whole way through my education.
Nimi Attanayake is an architect and co-founder of Nimtim Architects, the Nim alongside her husband Tim. Nimtim's work focuses on domestic projects, beautifully crafted and full of colour and novel materials. Each of their designs is incredibly unique and deeply personal to each client, originating from their design process of real listening and understanding. Nimi's involved in a number of design review panels and is seen as an advocate for change within the profession, celebrating diversity and inclusion, ensuring equal footing for female voices from all backgrounds.
Before we set up Nimtim, we had real personal struggles. I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. I went through infertility. We just found that we could not go to a job that was so rigid.
Say you're a newly qualified architect, what would you say to them?
People can often measure their success related to other people, and I would just say celebrate the differences that you have. It makes you special. It brings things to practices that they may not have already. Unfortunately, a lot of the portfolios that I review are very similar. Trying to nurture that confidence within students from a practice owner point of view, that's what I want to see.
Nimi, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. So I think just as a warm-up, big question, why architecture? What is it about a career in architecture design that sort of gets you up in the morning, that kind of keeps you hungry and sort of moving forward?
Well, that's a really good question. It never was architecture. I think I've battled with the profession and my place in it the whole way through my education. And it's only later, like in the last 10, 11 years since we set up Nimtim, that I really am passionate about it. And I do see a place for myself. And I do love waking up every morning and doing what I do. I feel incredibly privileged and incredibly lucky that I get to decide what I do, or I get to do work that brings me value and hopefully value to other people. So I like, and I think also that architecture has changed since I was educated in it. So now, you know, my day might look like coming to do a podcast, or like presenting a scheme that we're doing where we're reimagining green spaces. We're working with the National Trust. We're reimagining green spaces of a local London estate. And the project, the commission, is all about engagement. And I love talking about that. I think I like people, and I like making architecture accessible for people. I think the elements of it that I don't like are how othering it can sometimes make you feel. And so I try not to put myself in those environments. And so because of that, I feel really excited.
It's a lovely answer. In terms of you getting into this profession then, you said just now that, you know, architecture wasn't your main passion point. What is your route into this? You know, what were those early days like, you coming into the design profession, you deciding to take this path, I suppose, like your family, your situation?
Yeah, so it was all around me in many ways. My family is very extended. There's a lot of us and we're all very close. And when I was little, we all lived in a big house while my parents saved up to get something. And one uncle was a civil engineer, another uncle was a building surveyor, and they just all loved, like, they would always do like mad DIY projects. So I've got this vivid memory of them building their kind of garden shed and me really wanting to get involved in that. And then I hear stories about how I was really annoying and like a beam fell on my head and then my mum got really upset, but I was always interested. And then I guess when it came to choosing a career, I had an older cousin who had chosen to do architecture. And I'm Sri Lankan, so I'm from an Asian family. And when I was sort of 14, I was kind of given the choices of there's medicine or there's law. You know, which ones do you want to pick? Those are the careers. And so to do something artistic or creative was actually quite foreign to my family. But they were really supportive of a profession, and a profession within the built environment, because some of my other family members were doing that. But the the struggle I had was I really liked art. I was really good at maths. I was hardworking and diligent. I had a sort of mix of science and art background, but I didn't actually know what architecture was because they didn't teach it at school. So you did DT, and I thought, oh great, I can make something that lights up or whatever. You know, I can carve a box. I didn't really know how to use a scale rule. I didn't know how to lay out a page, so that you can convey information. I started at Nottingham. I chose the university because it was a campus university. It was very pretty. It had nice gardens, and it was away from London. So I wanted to be away from my parents. And then as soon as I started it was a bit of a shock to the system. And I think back then, I don't know now, but back then the dropout rates for architecture were really high.
Right.
Because of that issue that people didn't know what it entailed. And so I finished my degree and again had a bit of I don't know if this is for me. I went and did work experience. At that time, a lot of the practices were run by kind of older white people, and I didn't see myself reflected in the profession, and I really struggled with finding a place for somebody who's a bit different. And maybe, there weren't many women, there weren't many people of colour, and there wasn't much space for kind of young vibrancy doing things differently. It was a set mould. So I took a few years out, and then I had sorry, this is a very long-winded answer to your question. I had a few years out, and then I sort of realised actually that I saw everything, I valued everything through the lens of architecture. And I don't know whether that was because of my education that far, or whether that's just something I've always been interested in. But I could only process things through architecture. And so I ended up doing my part 2 at Westminster and really loving it, because actually that was a much more forward school at the time. It had units. You were allowed to pursue your own interests a bit more. You were allowed to sort of almost self-lead, self-direct yourself in the education. And I really enjoyed that. It was tricky when you come out of a diploma and then go back into an architecture job, because again, you're like faced with budget and like building regulations and all this kind of statutory requirements, and which you don't necessarily do in the design projects. They're always about creative and fun. So I struggled again with it, and worked for a number of different large practices, small and large, predominantly large. And then was in, I think it was 2009, made redundant. I was working for a big practice, and that was around the time of the sort of a recession, and was made redundant. And again, had a sort of time out where I was able to reflect on the profession and my place in it. And then shortly after that, we came back. We went into practice, but we started doing stuff on our own. And then we sort of decided to set up Nimtim.
I suppose with that in mind, obviously, Nimtim, a very well-known practice. You run that with your husband, who you met during your part 2. That's correct. Going into that entrepreneurial route when both of you are architects at probably quite a young age, how do you reflect on that? What lessons can you take from that? And also, what was it about the industry at that point in time and your experience from working in those larger practices? Did you either sort of take on board or kind of rebel against when you were forming your own way forward?
I think we were, like you say, we were quite young. It wasn't a common thing. You didn't have a lot of young people setting up practices sort of 11, 12 years ago. I think we were working for big practices, but we wanted more freedom. We wanted more creative control over what we did, and also flexibility. I think before we set up Nimtim, we had real personal struggles. I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. I went through infertility, and suddenly it kind of really refocuses you on what's important. And we just found that we could not go to a job that was so rigid, where you worked like 9 to 6, often 9 to 8, let's be honest. And if you had deadlines later, and what were we getting out of that? How was that fulfilling our lives? But it was a massive risk, and we didn't really know anything about business above what we'd learned during our part 3. So, like how to write an invoice, or how to do financial forecasting, or, letterheads. We didn't have any websites. We didn't have any of that. But I think we kind of felt our way. And actually, that's something that we take pride in, that we built our website and it looks handmade and it looks approachable and friendly and relatable. It doesn't look all glossy, and there's a quality in that. And the way that we worked with everyday people. So we had to get projects where we could. And a lot of those were from people who had no idea what architecture was. And we'd then have to explain the process to them. And then we found out, actually, we really loved that. Like, we really like getting rid of all the jargon and that kind of othering kind of nature that sometimes architecture can have, and start making it really everyday, really kind of approachable and relatable to people. We really liked that.
I think that's really interesting. And something I really want to kind of draw upon is that the nature of your work, the nature of your approach, to me, it looks like you're very much as a practice, a sort of facilitator. You're helping predominantly people that don't, like you say, don't understand architecture per se. It's their first time doing a project. You're guiding them along the process. And one of my experiences of Nimtim has been through the Domestica course that you guys did, and how you talk about the briefing game in that. And I find that an incredibly kind of interesting and novel process. And I wonder whether you talk about that a little bit more in terms of how you feel as you're educating people, you're taking your clients on a journey, I suppose.
Yeah, we used to have sort of like standard questions that we'd ask every client. But then we realised each client, they're not all the same. And also, you're only getting an answer from what you ask. So if you don't ask the question, you won't ever know. So then we tried to create something that was more fun and playful, and took out the kind of stigma about the process, where people might not know they might not know the process. They might not know the words to describe what they're doing, or what's important to them. And actually, it's been really lovely, because we've been able to kind of build a relationship through playing that game, where people trust us. And then as we go through the process, they start to become empowered and feel a sense of agency within it, which is great. And I think it shows in every project, because then it's got part of them in it. And we've been able to take that way of working and kind of scale it up so that we can do bigger projects, use it in community engagement for wider reaching subjects like the kind of forgotten green spaces I was talking about earlier, or kind of bigger spaces like a school, for example, or a master plan. And we can start to talk to people about that. And especially when, in the community, English isn't always a first language, or children may not feel the confidence to talk about what they'd like to see. And it kind of levels everybody up, and everybody feels empowered, and it's a great thing to see.
I think that is a fascinating thing, because to me, it looks like Nimtim is more of a kind of an approach. I think when you look at your work, there's such a variety in, the buildings that come out of it, sort of thing. It's almost like, you saying, you can scale this approach up from a domestic scale to a master plan sort of thing. It's almost like a way of doing things, a way of thinking, a way of communicating stuff. How much of that is kind of intentional?
I think we have a starting point, which is usually the briefing game. We have counters on there, so we might try and predict certain things that might come up. But we always like to leave an element of chance. So we always like to leave an element of unknown. So, for example, with the briefing game, we'll have blank counters, and we try and encourage people to populate that with things that might be related to them or their culture or their heritage. We then, I guess, we try to steer the ship so that it follows, you know, for example, the Reba stage of work, or it follows the process so that we're getting information that is relevant to that stage in the project. So we don't try and go too much in detail at the beginning, if you see what I mean. So we are in the background almost shaping the environment that allows the process to happen.
Yeah, fascinating. In terms of, you know, the resultant buildings, I think another thing as an outsider you can see are those kind of novel, interesting, sustainably led uses of material, color, texture, things like that. Again, how much does that come from the client? How much is it you guys steering? And I suppose it's that sort of balance between guidance and decision making and the architect proposing solutions, sort of thing. How do you, where do you sit in all of those things?
So I think we try to agree with our clients and get them on board to a concept, a narrative, a story of what they want to achieve. We then like to share that, so it's a common goal that the client believes in, we believe in, the contractor believes in, subcontractors believe in, and they all buy into it to deliver. It helps to make decisions by agreeing that up front. And so we are lucky that we're a small practice, and certain projects don't lend themselves to be able to have the flexibility. But in a lot of our other projects where we're a small practice and we're working with small clients, we can come to them with exciting materials or exciting textures or exciting ideas that, as long as we show them it fits within the concept that we've got and the narrative that we're building, the clients are really receptive to it. And so many of them have, they don't necessarily know about hempcrete. They wouldn't know that you could use cork internally and externally because they're not technically in that field. So they don't have that technical information. They don't know about build-ups, but we do. And we can propose it to them and show and evidence how it fits in with the concept. And actually, it's been really nice when they love it, that, they take ownership of it, and they, one client stands by the cork wall and sniffs it all the time because it smells a little bit like charred timber, or like the hempcrete, they just love sitting in the space because it keeps such a nice temperature, and also the sound, it can buffer the sound. So it's actually a really interesting, different quality in that space, and they can enjoy that.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. How much, I know you're a landscape designer as well. How much do you think that plays into your designs? I know I've heard you reference the sort of work of Geoffrey Barwer before, and the sort of, obviously, the connection between the inside and outside, and obviously his work is a different climate to the UK. But, I think one of the big things, I mean, maybe it comes from doing domestic projects where you're building right up to people's gardens, sort of thing. But it does feel like a lot of your work has an innate connection with the outside. How much do you kind of think about that? And I think that's probably one of the draws that clients want, is that connection with the outside.
It's changed a lot. People now put more put more importance on their homes as places that can promote their well-being. Clients are much more aware about the climate. They're much more aware about sustainability. They're much more aware about chemicals produced in various, paints or treatments that you might put on materials. And I think we're really keen on those. I think coming from a place where the outside is very much part of the inside, in Sri Lanka, you can't have a concrete wall and keep that separation. It just bleeds. It's a humid climate. The kind of the plants, the jungle, it just comes into your house. It just, it takes over. And sort of promoting natural ventilation. A lot of those houses they don't have air conditioning or mechanical heat recovery systems. So looking at how to do it in a more naturally sustainable way, I think, is part of our responsibility as architects. And especially at the moment, it feels like something that we choose to do and we also bring to the clients that we work with. We recently wrote Tim wrote a piece about Grenfell and some of the lobbying that had gone on there using certain types of insulation, which were highly combustible. And we kind of decided as a practice, this was a few years before the outcome of the inquiry came out. We decided to use kind of more sustainable insulation within our build-ups, which, it does make the build-ups bigger. The new walls are thicker. But actually, we haven't had a single pushback from clients about that. They're all happy to kind of use something more natural, and thicker walls just mean that they've got better temperature regulation inside their homes. I think sometimes there's like a preconception that people aren't going to be open to this, but I think they are. And I think it's the smaller groups, the smaller people where they've got their own money, it's their life savings and it matters. Course, yeah. And yet they're willing to spend it on that sort of climate decision, sustainable decisions. And I think that's really valuable.
In terms of, in that case, you're taking a position, in terms of where you feel comfortable, where you sit ethically. Where do you sit in terms of as a practice? In terms of setting those standards within your own practice, in terms of, the ethical elements. I know, in terms of your staffing, it's a predominantly female-led staff, for example. How much of that, again, is intentional? And it's something we've touched on with other guests about, improving the practicing, for architects, for young people in the profession. Obviously, architecture, as we mentioned, has typically got a history of long hours and low pay sort of thing. I guess, what do you feel you're doing as a small practice to combat those things?
I guess lots of things, and I'm not really sure. I think we try not to be guided about how other practices are doing things. We try and lead by example. We're married. We have 2 adopted children. It's a juggle, and we allow flexible working. We allow working from home. We try and leave promptly. We have things like if people have to stay late, that they're given toil. We try and create a really nice environment where we want to come into work every day. So we'll have monthly soup and salad. We try and arrange lectures to go out and see together. We try and visit buildings where potentially there might be something interesting that we can take inspiration from or bring back into the practice. We try not to lead the practice, but encourage others to kind of take part in it, if that makes sense. So we try not to implement ways that it's going to be, but let everybody shape those. So, for example, we try and invite them into like the financial workings of the practice. We have regular updates. We have open salaries. We also had to recently redo our offices, which was really fun and crazy and stressful. And we tried to use natural materials where possible, but also try and get everything used or secondhand. So we weren't having to buy things new to try and reduce the kind of carbon footprint of that project.
Yes, it feels like you've taken a very similar approach that you take with your projects, in that sort of open, honest conversation, communication sort of thing.
I guess so. I don't know that we intentionally did that, but I think by nature of who we are, I think that's how our work is kind of a reflection of who we are and our practices as well. We never intended to get more women in the practice, but it is a lovely thing. It's really, really nice that there are loads more women. And I think it's a great thing every day to work with women.
In terms of, say you're a newly qualified architect or a young part one starting out in the profession today, what would you say to them? What can they learn from your journey in architecture or your journey in design?
I think, and I've spoken about this a lot, and I guess maybe this is repetitive if you've ever heard me speak before, but I think that people can often want to conform. They can often measure their success related to other people and see that any differences are maybe not a success or a hindrance. And I would just say, celebrate the differences that you have. It makes you special. It brings things to practices that they may not have already. And I think that in the past, there's been a tendency for the education to make an output that is quite standardized. And I think, unfortunately, the part one graduates that I see, I'm an external examiner for Manchester and UCL, and a lot of the portfolios that I review are very similar. And I think trying to nurture that confidence within students, and also for them to go out in interviews and even put it in their portfolio, put themselves in there from a practice director point of view, from a practice owner point of view, that's what I want to see.
It's a really beautiful message. Do you think your career's turned out how you imagined?
No. No. I never would have thought I would be in this position and speaking to you and doing a podcast. No. And the projects that we do at Nimtim, passionate about every single one of them. And I think I didn't imagine that I would ever have that in my working life. And I feel so proud that I love what I do. I love my job. I love my children. I love my life. And I'm very, very lucky for that. Especially when I think in 2013 and 2014, when I was diagnosed with cancer, I didn't know what to do, and everything fell apart, and it came as such a shock. And to be sitting here sort of 10 years later with what we've built from that experience, from that trauma, is something I could never have imagined. And I'm so grateful.
Obviously, Nimtim is known for its, really wonderful domestic projects, and you can see you're doing more of these community-led, landscape-led projects. What's on the cards for Nimtim? What is the overall, goal? What's your plan?
Oh, that's a really good question. That's too many good questions. Mm-hmm. I don't know that we've got an answer yet. I think we're really keen on building some of the threads that we're doing at the moment. So with our residential project, we'd like to continue doing more of those. We really enjoy them. We'd like to do bigger projects, bigger residential projects, new builds, with the same ethos, the same values that we've done with the smaller interventions. With the landscape projects where we've prioritised community engagement, we want to continue those. There's so many spaces in London and probably nationwide where they're just they're underutilised, they're forgotten. And if COVID taught us anything, it was the importance of those green spaces when people don't have anything, when then they've just got a balcony, having those communal green spaces which exist on estates throughout the country, making them better utilised, making them more open to everybody so that everyone can access them, I think is really important and something we're really keen to get involved with. And then finally, we're writing a book. We're writing a book for Reba called Joyful Spaces. And what's been lovely about that process is speaking to other practices who have similar processes for creating meaningful architecture. And that's what we think is joyful. So that's been fun.
That's incredibly exciting. What do you, I mean, you mentioned previously about the way you work. What do you think a Nimtim developer-led apartment building looks like, or a Nimtim master plan looks like? Is it just about the approach? Is it just about the facilitation, or is there a end goal in mind?
I think those two things would look quite different. I think a Nimtim apartment would be a very exciting, very different, maybe a bit bespoke and unique and individual, maybe not to everyone's taste, but definitely to the ones who live there, it would be meet their needs, and that would be a success for us. I think a master plan, I think for us, I don't feel successful master plans come through one practice. I think there has to be diversity in it. And actually I think a lot of the procurement processes now are realising that, and that collaboration can make successful projects rather than be a hindrance. You know, the more people that are involved, the more people you've got to deal with. And in the history of those sorts of projects, that's seen as a negative. I think now people are starting to realise that the more people that are involved in designing and creating these places, the more representative it is of the community that it's serving. So I think a master plan would never be done by Nimtim alone.
I think one thread that seems to be common amongst our conversation and your work is that sort of human approach and the understanding of different people, the representation of different people, and your role in that. Where do you kind of see architecture in the future, where, you know, we're constantly being told more about AI, you know, the removal of the human from the process sort of thing? How are you going to be navigating that in the future?
We're still getting to grips with that as a practice, and something that Tim's really keen on. I think architects, this is a massive generalisation, so I'll just say maybe Nimtim. I think we aren't strong in running businesses. You know, we're not trained in business, really. So where AI or computer systems can help is helping us run more of the business side, or the kind of standardization, helping us to be...
Sorry.
That's okay.
Time.
Oh, we might be over time.
This is such an uplifting conversation.
Yeah.
Oh,
honestly,
I hope so. Sorry, I get quite ranty.
No. Honestly, there's like such a warmth from what you're saying.
Yeah.
Oh, I hope so, not ranty.
No, completely not. Like,
Remind myself of my mum. She gets on her high horse and then starts ranting about stuff, and I'm like, oh, mum.
No, I just think it's a really beautiful approach that you've got. Like, I think that really comes across. Like, I think it's just, yeah.
We all good, Lucy?
I'm gonna step out and talk to this person because I think they've mixed up the day. They're not actually booked in today.
Yeah, I can't remember what you asked.
Yeah, neither can I. Okay. I think one thread that's obviously kind of clear from our conversation and from your work is that sort of human, you know, centric approach and the importance of people's voices, their opinions, on, you know, how they work in a space, how they feel about their own space and the projects. In a world that's, you know, evolving, and the importance of AI and things we keep being told, how are Nimtim sort of negotiating that in the future, and whether that's positive or detrimental to what you're doing?
I think we are keen to use AI and the kind of fast-paced technology that's coming out to help us do what we enjoy doing. And I think, you know, we're not the greatest of business people. I think Tim would agree with me. And if there are systems in place, if AI can help that, we're really positive about that. I think we strongly believe, like you've kind of mentioned, that we should be designing for the people that are using those spaces. And I think people respond when they see that people like them are designing them. So if you try and standardize the design process or the engagement process, I think that won't be a success. I think it is about people, and it is about people for us, and that's what makes successful projects. I think AI and technology can support that, but I don't think it can do that in the place of a human. Does that make sense?
That makes complete sense. Perfect. And that's it. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Good.
Yay.
Well done.
Nice.
That was so good.
Yeah, honestly, really, really lovely. Thank you so much.
Wow. What a story.
I guess so. I don't know. It's hard. It's always siloed. It's so, architecture's very siloed, isn't it? Like, you never know what anyone else, what they're, and I think everyone has a story, but I think most of the time there's a bit of shame about saying it.
Yeah, completely.
And actually, as soon as I started saying to clients and stuff, oh, I've got cancer, they'd be like, oh yeah, I had cancer. And you're like, oh, great, I can actually talk to you. Or they know someone, or, you know, if as soon as you start sharing stories, it will lead somewhere.
Being open and honest and communicating is a good thing, isn't it?
It really is. It's very un-British.
Completely.
It's quite difficult, but I think lots of people relate to it and like it, and also like culturally, I think you're used to it. It's just a British thing, I think, maybe of just being a little bit. No, exactly. Same about like talking about money. We hate it.
Yeah. My middle child's autistic, and we have exactly the same thing.
Oh,
like
interesting.
the minute I talk to someone and they go, oh, I did, so we just go. And there's like that appreciation that you have that's untold between each other, that you just go, oh, you get it, obviously, like you get it now, sort of thing. And it's just, it does build that sort of connection where you just kind of go, you know.
But I think also the children feel it. So before, you know, you'd always almost have to make them feel like they were normal, like they. But actually now you can say, my child's autistic, and then you'd be like, oh, actually, we're just getting our child assessed because he's a boy and he's fucking crazy. And then you're like, you can share that. And it's nice for the children to hear that autism's actually like, don't they say it's like a superpower or something? Which is great. Great way to describe it.
Just like the power of just talking about things just has like so much value to it. Like, you know.
But that's what I mean. Like when you come out of part one, you don't feel like, I mean, obviously, you know, when you're 21, you don't necessarily have these life experiences. But you might do. Like some of them might be refugees who come over and their parents have saved every penny they've had to do architecture education, and they feel ashamed by that. But actually, that's amazing, you know?
I obviously geek out on all the designy type things, and honestly, I think your process is so interesting, like the way of doing it, and like, you know, actually giving a shit what people say sort of thing. It's just like so important and alien to a lot of practices. So I like that sort of bit, but obviously we want to really do the career stuff and the story of things. But I think one thing we mentioned before was like lots of the podcasts go, where did you go to school? What did you do at university? And go through that exact route. And I think that's kind of less interesting. And that's the value of the sort of podcast format, isn't it? That people show a more vulnerable side or an interesting thing that isn't on their website, like you say.
Architecture is because it's a creative industry. You want to give it your all. It's you know, Nimtim was we had the dog, that was the first baby. Then we had Nimtim. And it is a bit of a baby. So you've got all these babies to try and nurture.